Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ron Rout, and it's my pleasure to be with you this afternoon to introduce our next speaker. I'd like to thank Rick Hunt and Bill Erickson and the SNA staff for putting on this event and for giving me the opportunity to return to the San Diego waterfront and to the SNA stage. On 14 April 1988, the third ship named USS Samuel B. Roberts, FFG 58, struck an Iranian mine in the Arabian Gulf. 2 years earlier, upon FFG 58's commissioning in 1986, her skipper, Paul Rinn, had a bronze plaque installed that listed the names of all those who served aboard the earlier Samuel B. Roberts, DE 413, when she fought so valiantly during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. As FFG 58 was burning and in grave danger of sinking, sailors were seen to place their hands on the plaque, gaining inspiration and strength from the legacy of those who endured and persevered before. Post-event computer simulations showed that FFG 58 should have gone down, yet those sailors saved their ship in one of the most awesome displays of damage control in U.S. Navy history. At a time when the survival of the ship was very much in doubt, the Admiral, commander of Middle East Force, queried Captain Rinn as to whether he was considering abandoning ship. Rinn responded he had absolutely no intention of doing so, finishing his defiant statement with the ship's motto, "No higher honor." Is that you or what? Paul is the perfect speaker for today's topic, the enduring value of strong leadership and sailor performance. And you can add to that, the perfect speaker for taking care of your people. Captain Rinn is an accomplished naval leader and successful businessman. His career in the Navy spanned almost 3 decades and encompassed challenging positions in a multitude of key operational assignments, combat encounters, as well as significant Pentagon postings. As a surface warfare officer, his professional path took him from the rivers of Southeast Asia to command of 2 frontline Navy warships, the guided missile frigate Samuel B. Roberts and the Aegis cruiser USS Leyte Gulf, selected as the top Aegis cruiser in the Atlantic Fleet during Captain Rinn's command. You may recall that the heroic story of Samuel B. Roberts, which is required reading at the Naval Academy, Naval War College, and Surface Warfare Officers School, is the subject of the Washington Post bestseller listed book, No Higher Honor. Ashore, Captain Rinn served as executive assistant to the head of the Surface Navy, and later as special assistant to 2 chiefs of naval operations. In 2008, Paul Rinn was voted into the Surface Navy Association Hall of Fame. In 1988, Captain Rinn retired from the United States Navy and joined the international consulting firm of Whitney, Bradley & Brown. He was an integral part of the company's growth from a $5 million organization to a $120 million influential Washington, D.C. consulting firm. In 2001, he was promoted vice president, assuming leadership of the company's largest sector, doubling both the sector's productivity and profit margins over the next 4 years. In 2012, Paul Rinn retired from WBB. He presently serves as director of the Navy Safe Harbor Foundation, providing financial assistance to families of active duty service members who have been injured in the line of duty, who may require travel and logistical support for rehab and to care for them. On a personal note, I have worked with Paul Rinn from time to time over the span of our careers and in civilian life. I'm pleased he's here today to share with you the same story that had such impact on me in 1988. Paul was in the Pentagon some months after his ship survived the mine strike. I was soon to be on my way to my first command at sea. His briefing to us that day in the Pentagon shaped my command tour then, and then for each command tour thereafter. Paul's tale of preparedness, of the incredible accomplishments of a well-trained and well-disciplined crew, and the very human story of struggle for survival is a story that can help us all be better leaders and better shipmates, especially in times of adversity. Please help me welcome Paul Rinn.
Thanks, Ron. Well, thank you very much, Ron. And that's a very kind introduction. I'm honored to be here in San Diego to speak at this year's West Coast Symposium to the officers and chief petty officers and sailors, as well as the corporate representatives of companies who develop and install the state-of-the-art technology we have and support the sailors that are employing it in multiple ways to make us the finest, most effective, forward-deployed Navy in the history of the world. You know, recently I was having breakfast with a couple of newly commissioned officers and a couple of sailors, and the conversation got around to service in the armed forces. And one of them said, "Well, sir, did you ever serve in any organization? Were you ever in the Navy?" And after I told them, they both remarked, wow, what was it like back then? You know, it must have been totally different. You know, the Navy and the world, you know, how did you get by? And I told them, well, you know, we had a fish for our dinners and everything, and they were just amazed, except on the northern reaches of the Mekong River, that was true sometimes. So I know, many of you are sitting here thinking, just how old is this guy? And when did he join the Navy? And what is he about to tell us? And is it relevant at all? Does it really have a bearing on it? Well, I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but I will tell you that the Navy and the world in some ways were very different when I joined, but in so many ways very much the same as they are today. So first, let me give you some thoughts to ponder about just that. The year I joined the Navy, the New York Jets won the Super Bowl, and the New York Mets followed that up by winning the World Series. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that is very different. Milk was $1 a gallon, and gasoline was 25 cents a gallon. Cigarettes were 25 cents a pack, and people could smoke cigarettes in restaurants, in meeting rooms, in the movie theater, and on planes, and anywhere they wanted. A stamp was 5 cents, and they guaranteed delivery and pulled it off in 3 days. The Dow Jones Industrial Average closed on December 28th of the year I joined the Navy, for all you stock market guys, at 980. An instant starting salary that year was $4,540 a year. And a house in San Diego, for all of you San Diego residents, the median price of a house in San Diego was $26,999. How's that? But there was no desktops, there were no laptops, there were no iPads or cell phones. There was no internet, and therefore no relentless barrage of emails from shore staffs driving you crazy and asking you for information by 1600. There was no tweeting or Snapchatting. And when you dialed a phone, and yes, you did dial it, you got a human being on the other side of the phone who answered your question, didn't tell you that your call was very important to him, and didn't play any damn music you didn't want to hear. We had 996 ships. 323 of them were destroyers. Those destroyers carried about 1,200 plus 5-inch rounds, but that only lasted about 8 days on the gun line off of Vietnam, using a Mark I Able analog computer. We had Tartar, Terrier, and Talos missiles, as well as SPS-10, 40, and SPIG-50 radars. And missile X's back then, listening to all this technology talk today, was sometimes very exciting, but not necessarily in a good way. We shot morning stars, we shot evening stars, as well as local apparent noon and sun lines, because there was no sat-nav, and there was no Loran Charlie, and navigation was a serious mathematical exercise punctuated by Siemens eye with a sextant. Up tempo and PERS tempo were considered only advisory, and 6-month deployments sometimes grew to 9 to meet operational wartime commitments. Sound familiar? We did not have IAs, but a tour of duty on the Mekong River was considered a career-enhancing billet. That is, if and when you got back to CONUS. And by the way, thank you for your service was not a standard response from our people in our country when you told them that you were serving in the Navy. We had a near-peer competitor at the time that Navy critics and experts were quick to declare would soon take over the domination of the seas, even though, like today, they had never demonstrated long-term, consistent, coordinated combat operations far from their shores, nor shown any great effective blue water reach, respect for international law, knowledge of rules of the road, or other nations' maritime sovereignty, and were being met by us at every operational intersection by our forces and checked in what they were doing. Yes, the Navy and the world were different in some ways, but very much the same in others. But there was one major thing that is much the same today as it was back then, and that is the American sailor. That indispensable individual that comes to work every day and gives his or her all for our country, who deserves strong, consistent, thoughtful, capable leadership that inspires and motivates them to excel. The sailors who join the Navy for a multitude of reasons, but in almost every case have a sense of adventure and patriotism at their foundation. They are the principal constant in our Navy throughout the years, through all the technological advances, the leadership philosophies that frequently change, the management concepts, and now the divisive social theories. They are the fire that powers the United States Navy. And our job as leaders, our most important job throughout the chain of command on every ship, is to lead them with integrity and professionalism and concern for their well-being. We must develop and focus their talent so that they can perform at a level better than they ever thought they could achieve. For it's their esprit de corps that embodies the warrior spirit of valor, determination, loyalty, and devotion to duty, and of being a good shipmate in the best Navy in the world. It is their shared conviction that we are tough and able to conquer any challenge put before us. This is not outworn sentimentality or wishful thinking. We are a service Navy, have demonstrated this warrior spirit many times throughout our history, especially in times of open conflict. It has enabled us to stay on station in hostile waters indefinitely and defeat our adversaries, frequently many times our size and numbers. It also has led us to be able to save ships that have suffered staggering damage, and many maritime experts have said should have gone to the bottom of the sea. Former Secretary of Defense, General James Mattis, stated it best when he said, "You must clearly spell out what success looks like to your people. Then set the standards that they understand, motivate and inspire your personnel, and then work intensely and diligently to achieve those goals. If you invest in your people, they will rarely let you down." But why? Why work so hard? Why invest so much? Well, my friends, the reason is because unlike the Olympics that we talked about in the last session, there are no medals for second place in war. And the runner-up position doesn't really look very pretty. Practice and intensity is necessary. It is a necessary thing. Would a coach take a team to the Super Bowl without knowing their individual skills and honing them with great intensity and practicing relentlessly before being ready for the game? I think not. Every year, when we look at our Navy's performance, we must consider how our traditions and our history have shaped us into the Navy that we are today, to deter aggressors and prevent war, to secure the world's waterways for commerce, as well as providing humanitarian aid where needed to victims of natural disasters, just like we are doing today with the Coast Guard off of Haiti. Our media frequently ignores much of which, and therefore most Americans and the American public are unaware. The Navy's critics and self-proclaimed geopolitical experts seem to want to find something inherently wrong with the Navy's performance. And no doubt, as recently pointed out by the Montgomery study, there are significant issues with underfunding, maintenance deferrals, extended and frequent operational deployments, supply support, and manning shortfalls, as well as civilian overreach with our force. I might point out at this point that none of those issues are caused by shipboard personnel. But when to prove their point, these critics start connecting dots over multiple years of operations to unrelated singular events as examples of their theory that the Navy's failings, and ignore thousands of successful operational days underway, intense hours of pressure points around the world, performed by our Navy with demonstrated good seamanship, fire discipline, unequal sustainment, thousands of underway replenishments, and seat-based helo flight hours, as well as adherence to the international law and maritime rules of engagement, despite dangerous and amateur behavior by various actors all over the oceans of the world, then I'm sorry, frankly, these critics truly missed the mark. The overall performance and professionalism and operational sustainability of today's Navy is unmatched by any Navy in the history of the world. If you want to argue with that, I'll wait till this afternoon for an answer. No, I'll wait till tomorrow morning. In fact, I'll wait till the end of the week. In fact, damn it, I'll wait till the end of the year. Unmatched by any Navy in the history of the world. That does not mean that we don't have problems. We sure as heck do. They are troubling and they need to be addressed. But it also does not mean we should ignore our potential adversary, increasing capabilities, but as we work to fix our problems and develop our strategy to train to counter our potential foes, let's be optimistic and not make them 10 feet tall as we have in the past, and trust that our forces afloat can do the job when provided with the proper resources and funding. Today, I want to focus on the fighting spirit of our Navy. All of you who wear the uniform are an indispensable part of that Navy that is built and prepared for war, and to keep the peace through deterrence. We operate forward to preserve the peace, but we can never forget that we build, train, and prepare our force to win wars, and to convince our adversaries, whoever they may be, that to turn on us and confront us is very much a zero-sum game. But as stated earlier, our naval might is about much more than cutting-edge technology. It is about individuals like all of you. It is about your leadership style. It is about your example, your ingenuity, your innovation, and your pursuit of excellence, your can-do attitude and fortitude in the face of hardships, tough extended deployments, and danger. It is about the cut of your jib and your ability to find a way to always get the job done, no matter what circumstances. Today's surface Navy is a powerful force. We are a unique combination of tradition and brashness, as well as a professionalism soaked in salt water. We often find that we cannot tolerate bureaucracy, probably because we spent most of our history frequently isolated from it by hundreds or thousands of miles at sea, even though today the internet continues somewhat to affect that in today's world. The unforgiving environment with which we all must continually operate always shapes us. The sea can always be deadly for the unprepared and less vigilant. Operating from ships far from home waters and the safety of shore is often more dangerous than the uninitiated can ever imagine. Yet it is this environment that hardens the steel of our newly forged shipmates. The sea, as you all know, is very unforgiving, and as a result, sailors quickly learn a healthy respect for it. It ingrains into them the principles of self-reliance, a special respect for the ship's captain, the importance of the chain of command, and the notion of absolute accountability. A sailor soon learns that he or she must rely on self and his or her shipmates. They are interwoven into the very fabric of their ship and their being. Sailors, more quickly than any other profession, depend on whom they must work with and count on. A sailor fights and dies with his or her shipmates. They are of preeminent importance. Each shipmate shares equally the emotions of a prolonged deployment, the risk of a sea battle or a raging storm. There is no rear echelon in the Navy, sorry. There is no retreat from the sea, and there are usually no reinforcements forthcoming, trust me. It is this reality that fosters a special relationship among shipmates that transcends any societal differences, forming bonds that last a lifetime. A sailor's career is not simply a list of locations and job titles. We remember each ship, each squadron and duty station where we served, our captains, our department heads, our chief petty officers, and our leading petty officers, as well as all of our shipmates. We remember the standards they set and the professional example they made, or in some cases, didn't make. And we learn from their leadership and example. Indeed, our lives in the Navy are defined by a succession of deployments, sometimes to exotic locations, and other times to not so glamorous garden spots in the dangerous corners of the world. We in the Navy are frequently questioned about our embrace of heritage and tradition. Some say we cling to our past too much. But for us, our traditions and our history have great meaning. They set a standard of performance and a pattern of excellence. They become a chart to depend on through the shoal waters of new unknown problems and difficult situations. Our history and traditions serve as an inspiration for us well into the future. They also demand leadership that brings us together as one force, trusting each other, focused, confident, and determined. They are the link with the past that sets the example and inspires us and instills that sense of pride, determination, and inspiration that makes us undefeatable. But what would a speech about power of leadership and sailor's performance be without some sailor stories that validate everything that I'm saying? So I'll give you a few scenarios you could well find yourself in, and perhaps wonder if you have anticipated the potential damage that you are facing, and trained your people well enough to fight and win. These scenarios will focus around leadership, innovation, determination, courage, and professionalism. They come from my command tour on Samuel B. Roberts in the late 80s. And I'll go through it and spell out the scenarios. There will be 4 of them. I'll talk about 4 incidents that occurred and the key people involved that contributed significantly to the saving of Samuel B. Roberts. Samuel B. Roberts deployed 6 months early in 1988 to convoy U.S. flag vessels in the Persian Gulf. The ship had won the Battle E, faster than any other ship or frigate of its kind. And when it got to the Gulf, it conducted 13 convoy missions throughout the Gulf, as well as defense ops in the Straits of Hormuz and interdiction ops also in the North and Persian Gulf. The crew was a cross-section of American society. 42 states were represented. Trust me, we had lots of diversity. That ship hung together, and the sailors learned to take care of their shipmates, to trust them, and yes, to even like them. We did a lot together. I've chosen these 4 moments and the specific individuals to amplify what I'm saying and what I've said in my previous remarks. To note that en route to the war zone of the Persian Gulf, where over 340 ships had been attacked and almost 600 maritime sailors and sailors on USS Stark have been killed during the operation. We practice not only the ability to fight our ship, we practice not only shipboard competency, but we practice the ability to fight hurt. And we thought about what it would be if we took a hit, and we fought through it. 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 And we fou and we lost power, if we lost the main drainage system, if we lost different systems on the ship, and what it would take for us to be able to engage an adversary and to fight, to win, and to save our ship. So, on the afternoon of April 14th, 1988, at approximately 16:45, while heading to a much-needed unrep with the San Jose to get fuel, to get cargo, and get mail, which we hadn't had in 30 days, Samuel B. Roberts made a starboard turn 25 miles west of the Roshdam oil fields and proceeded to head at 22 knots south to the rendezvous. Moments later, after the turn, Seaman Bobby Gibson in the bow sighted what he thought were 3 porpoises roughly 1,000 yards ahead of the ship, except he realized that the porpoises weren't porpoising anymore, and he notified the bridge. The officer of the deck, Bob Firehammer, brought the ship to a stop, and at that moment we realized that we had 3 mines, 2 in front of us and 1 on our starboard side. We contacted Middle East Force and told them of our situation. They told us not to get any closer than 1,500 yards from the mines. Not too helpful. So I went to the 1MC and I announced to the crew that I believed we were in a minefield. I didn't know what kind of mines that they were, but I wasn't sure that they weren't acoustic, so I wanted everyone to go to general quarters stations and set zebra. I was not going to sound the klaxon alarm to bring them there. I wanted them to report in as soon as they were above the main deck, and when I got almost 90% of everybody up, I intended to back down our wake, which I could see roughly 8,000 to 9,000 yards behind us. I was very confident that we could get out of here in one piece. While trying to back away, and after going quietly to general quarters and looking aft, my ship exploded in a way that I had never seen. It literally came up 10 to 15 feet in the air, and when it came crashing down, it shot flames about 100 and some odd feet above the mast. At that moment, we had hit an MO8 mine that had been underneath us the whole time, which blew a 25-foot hole in the port side of our ship, fractured our keel, flooded the main engine room and AMR-3 in a matter of seconds, and suddenly we went from being a 4,000-ton frigate to a 6,000-ton frigate. In short, we were in trouble. It was almost sunset, and the nearest ship was USS Trenton, 125 miles away. I'm going to go through the actions of various people on the ship that I believe were the key moments and the key individuals to save the ship. They weren't necessarily the top sailors on board. They were, however, sailors who were imbued with everything that I've talked about love of shipmates, about honor, about integrity, about belief in the strength of the United States Navy, and also completely committed to saving their ship. It all starts in CCS. When the ship exploded, Senior Chief Walker, the EAL, was thrown to the deck. And the lights in the space remained on, but when he stood up, he noticed that the gas turbine console had died, and the EPSI panel had also gone dark. But through a number of drills that we had done over and over and over again to be ready, Walker knew if the lights were on in the space, then there was power, and he could power up the EPSI. He turned to Petty Officer Wallingford and told him to cut the cord off the vacuum cleaner in the space. Wallington asked him, could he do that? Walker's response, very profound. Wallingford immediately obeyed. They spliced the cord into the back of the EPSI, and the third plug he went to, the EPSI came alive. So in the first 5 minutes, having lost power and then started to regain it, Chief Petty Officer Walker can see our dilemma. Number 4 diesel, destroyed and gone. Number 3 diesel, badly fractured and just barely hanging on. Number 2 diesel running, but holding the whole load on the ship, which has to be stripped dramatically, because if we lose number 2 diesel, at this point we do not have the capability to restart it. We need number 1 diesel up in AMR-1. But the passageway to AMR-1 is blocked in the explosion and the hatch is jammed. Nobody can get there. Let's work on some of the other issues first. On the way to the Gulf, we had talked about in the weapons department, as well in the engineering department, what do we do if we suffer a hit? what do we do if we lose the vast majority of our power? And so we start to measure how much power, how many amps does it take to bring a missile out of the magazine onto the rail? Seems pretty minor, huh? And what does it take to light off the stir? How much power? What does it take to slew the launcher? How much power do we need to engage our adversary? Walker and the engineers and my fire controlman knew that answer. They knew it to a point that right after this explosion and the situation occurred, and what I haven't told you is just before we struck the mine, we detected that Iranian frigate Sabalan, who is not exactly a commendable platform, who had repeatedly attacked merchant ships and frequently we had mixed it up with, had started out about 22,000 yards to the north of us. Once we brought the radar back online and we started looking, Sabalan had closed to 12,000 yards. He wasn't coming in rapidly, but he was slowly but surely closing our position. I asked Main Battery Officer Robert Firehammer, had he talked to the engineers to see if he had enough power to bring a missile on the rail. They had already done the math. They already knew. Firehammer said yes. I said, bring up one standard missile. How's the stir? Stir is okay. Gave the bearing to Sabalan and directed them to lock up on him. Yes, a violation of the rules of engagement. Extraordinary situation. And so I called Sabalan and told him, number one, that we were in a minefield and we had suffered damage, but I wanted him to clear the area. He said something about wanting to operate in international waters, and I just reiterated the direction to him to not close us any further. The standard and the optimum range for firing an SM-1 is roughly 8,000 yards. That's the perfect distance for the missile to drop the fins, acquire, and hit, and that system. So I knew where Sabalan was and where he was going to be. And I warned him that if he came inside of 8,000 yards, I would shoot him. He never answered that call. And we waited, locked up, and he had to know we were locked up with the missile on the rail. And at 8,200 yards, Sabalan turned and opened to the northeast. I believe in my heart that the reason he turned, probably number one, he didn't know where the minefield was either. But number two, the sight he saw, even though we were burning and we were sinking, was not the sight he had anticipated, seeing an SM-1 missile pointed right at him and knowing through his EW people that we were locked on him. And so he cleared the area. But that performance did not happen ad hoc and just on the spot. It happened because the officers and the sailors and the chief petty officers worked tirelessly to know those attention to detail items to have their ship ready to fight and fight hurt. And I wouldn't say it was rewarding, it was just gratifying to see him open. I can tell you that in years since then, including at the Board of Inquiry for this event, I was asked why I hadn't fired. And the response was simple to my questioners. Do you know what the rule of engagement was? Don't fire unless fired upon. Do you know what international law says? You can't shoot at somebody who didn't do anything to you. Sabalan was not configured for mines. So there was no justification for me to shoot him. Did I want to? In spades. Did I think we could hammer him? Absolutely. But we had other problems to think about. And when Sabalan turned and opened the area, I would tell you that I was very, very happy. So situation one, preparation, readiness, planning, and knowing the small details in engaging and fighting. And drilling and drilling and drilling constantly to make sure everybody knew. Now, while this was all going on, the second event is about to unfold. The word was passed for flyaway team, flyaway team away, AMR-2. The flyaway team that we had on the ship was a group of guys that we put together because we thought if we were in this type of situation, not really anticipating it, then we might need people to swarm to a place where repair 2, 3, and 5 could not get to. The flyaway team was made up of the chief cook on the ship, Chief Kevin Ford, who was an inspirational guy, an inspirational leader, a motivator, and somebody who could really rally crew members. Ford asked, when he volunteered for the job, if he could select his personnel. And I said, sure. I knew he would pick a bunch of Red Sox fans because he was a Red Sox sort of guy. So Ford went down, and the first guy he picked was PC2 Pettigrew, one of the smallest guys on the ship, all 5'2" and 130 pounds. And I said, why Pettigrew? And he said, because he's a little guy and he can probably get places that all the big guys can't get. Makes sense? The next three guys he picked, led by RM2, Robert Jackson, were all guys on the Fat Boy program. I know we can't say that anymore. They were overweight, and they had problems getting their weight down. Simultaneously, they couldn't pass their DCPQS. So Ford said, hey, Captain, I'll run them and I'll teach them, and I'll get them in specs. Okay, that's 4. Then he picked a bosun mate. He said, I need somebody burly to keep everybody in line. And then an OS, and he said, I need an OS because I need somebody smarter out here to do the job. So that is Ford's team. And we drilled constantly on the ship, shoring, dewatering, firefighting, starting P250s. And invariably, in every competition, the flyaway team, or the Chinese bandits, as Ford liked to call them, always finished first or second in every event, because he had developed a tremendous sense of camaraderie and an ability to achieve things and convince them that they could do the impossible. So, after Sabalon has left, I know that the situation is critical. AMR, the main engine room is gone. AMR 3 is gone. And I know we have bad flooding in AMR 2, but I can tell you as a commanding officer, when somebody reports to you that 2 of the largest spaces on your ship are gone, it is hard to conceive that that's right. So I told my XO, John Eckelberry, that I was departing the bridge, and I was going to go down inside the skin of the ship to see just what I was hearing. And as I came down inside the skin of the ship, I was impressed by 2 things. Number 1 was the determined approach of the sailors on the ship, moving up and down, doing their jobs, many at ranks, just not having to be told what to do, doing what they were trained to do and doing it well. The other thing that impressed me was the devastation that the mine had struck inside the hull of my ship. Everything horizontal was shattered. Decks and bulkheads were buckled. Watertight hatches were jammed or cracked. It was an amazing scene. As I went by the engine room, the main engine room, I looked inside to see that they had just put out the fire. Repair 5 had gone in and extinguished it and rescued 4 sailors, the last 4 that had been in the space before we hit the mine. And I noticed one of them pointed out to me that the OD box that they had been working on the keel of the ship, was now stuck in the overhead in the main engine room, 26 feet above where they had been working. I left them, and as I walked across the mess decks to go into AMR 2, 2 individuals ran by me. One was PC2 Pettigrew, the postal clerk, carrying a mattress that was bigger than him, heading towards the hatch. The second guy was RM2 Jackson. RM2 Jackson, the Fat Boy program guy, was only wearing his skivvies and boondockers. It was kind of a surrealistic moment to say, and I tried to say, Jackson, what? And he just looked at me with this look that said, can't you see I'm busy, Captain? I gotta go. And I followed them through the scuttle, which was true. Pettigrew got through the scuttle, folded the mattress, pulled it down, Jackson gave it to him, and they disappeared. I went down the ladder after them, and what I saw was less than a pretty sight. But I learned immediately why Jackson had no clothes on. In the lower level of AMR 2, the water was just about up to my knees, but it was roughly 6 or 7 inches below the 2 fire pumps in the space that we desperately needed to dewater the space. The bulkhead, the after bulkhead that abutted the main engine room was fractured from the starboard side of the ship to the port side, and water was coming in sort of like a waterfall. And I saw at Jackson's handiwork, there were 3 holes in the bulkhead larger than basketball holes. And Jackson, who was the first guy who arrived in the space, the kid who couldn't pass his DCPQS because he couldn't understand height of metacenter and metacentric height, knew this one. And he picked up all the toolboxes in the space and all the heavy stuff, stuck them in the holes, ripped off his clothes, patched them around, and then grabbed every rag he could find. And in essence, in the first 7 or 8 minutes that Jackson is in the space before anybody else arrives, he has stopped the flooding by about 95%. Now we just have to stop the waterfall. So Jackson, when the rest of the guys arrive, they hand him oakum. And as you know in damage control, you tap oakum into the cracks across the space. But when you tap them into that crack, if the leak gets worse, or the water rush gets worse, it basically tells you that there's nothing but water on the other side of that bulkhead. And so by this time, Chief Ford has arrived. And Chief Ford tells Pettigrew and Jackson to go to the chief's mess. An incredible command decision. And they go up and they grab all their mattresses. And they're bringing them down one at a time. And the intent is to put the mattresses against the bulkhead, put a plywood stopper over it, and put the shoring on top of that, and that'll stop the flooding. And they're working at that as I arrive. It is not a pretty situation, as you can imagine, and I call them all together, just for a short moment. And I said, listen, I'm going to spell it all out. You've got to save that bulkhead. You've got to save the space. If the bulkhead goes, AMR2 will go, and so will our ship. And you will not get out of here alive. It is a moment that I have never forgotten, but I will never forget the looks on their face as they all looked at me and went, we got this, Captain. And Pettigrew, the shortest guy, the smallest guy in the team, goes, Captain, we're going to save this space. We got this. You got other things to worry about. And I looked at them and I said, okay, well, we're all in your hands. God bless you. And I turned to leave. And honestly, when I turned to leave, a little voice said to me, you'll never see these guys alive again. That's how great it was. But that thought was broken by this act. One of the guys puts a boombox on a refrigeration unit on the starboard side of the ship and immediately plugs in a journey tape. Now, there was mythology on Roberts that went something like this. Captain Rinn fears no man, but what he fears is that he'll come home some night and find one of us in the driveway in a Trans Am with one of his daughters listening to a journey tape, and he's scared as hell about that. I stopped just before I got on the ladder, and I turned around and I shouted, hey! And they all reacted, and I said, even now, your taste in music sucks. And if you can imagine a surrealistic moment where you're fighting for your lives and everybody's laughing, this was it. I turned to leave. Years later at the first reunion, all those guys said to me, you know, when you did that, we all looked at each other and said, can't be that bad. The old man's joking around. Yeah. How you carry yourself, how you deal with your crew, how you treat them, how you level with them, the most important thing. But as I turned to leave the space for the second time, and I had my hand on the ladder to leave, the lights started to flicker and started to go out. And I said to myself, we must be losing number 2 diesel. And then they went bright. And I had no idea what had caused that, but I thought to myself, whatever it is, we got to keep fighting to save the ship, and I left the space. This is what happened at that moment. The third incident, the third person. So we had a sailor on board the ship by the name of Fireman Tilley. Fireman Tilley arrived right after the ship had been commissioned, and he's from Hannibal, Missouri. Fireman Tilley looks about 17 years old. So the first night he's there, he goes out to a bar in Bath, Maine, and the bartender looks at him and says, I don't think you're old enough to have a beer. And Tilley says, yes, I am. And he whips out a government ID card that says he's 29 years old. And the bartender is absolutely astonished. And he says, you have anything to back this up? And Tilley very forwardly says, yes, I do. And whips out his driver's license from Missouri that says he's 24. We got a problem. So the next morning, Fireman Tilley is standing in front of me at Captain's Mast. And he says, you know, I'm sorry, I make mistakes, and I screwed this up. I promise, Captain, I'll never do it again. I'll do better. And I give him my best leadership speech. You know, the one that says, you've embarrassed the Navy. You've embarrassed your ship. My God, you've embarrassed yourself. What are you going to do? And he said, Captain, I'll be better. And when I leave mast that day, I think I have given him my best leadership speech, and I will never see Tilley again. I am so wrong. So Months pass, and the ship is operational. And every time I see Fireman Tilly, he is head down, rear end up, and he is working hard. And he's a good guy, and he's respected by his crewmen because he volunteers for things. He just is really into being a part of the crew. We have a drug bust down in the Caribbean. We're in two successive weeks, we bust about 26,000 pounds of marijuana and cocaine on 2 different ships. And the Coast Guard and the Navy are ecstatic about our performance, and they sent us into St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands for a port visit. It's a great time. And the sailors go, and they fix churches, they fix schools, they rewire hospitals, they do all sorts of community action stuff that's great. And Tilly is very much a part of that. But on the last night that they're there, Tilly goes to dinner with a number of his shipmates. And they're at Blackbeard's Castle. And if you know Blackbeard's Castle, they have these huge bay windows that look out over the bay. On the inside, they're glass. On the outside, they're mirrors. Tilly decides that he needs to go to the men's room before they leave. So he goes up, and there's a line outside the men's room. He looks outside, he sees the bushes. He goes, oh, what the heck? He goes out in the bushes, looks up at the mirrors and says, look at those doggone mirrors. We don't have anything like that in Hannibal, Missouri, and drops his drawers, and he's in front of me the next morning for lewd and lascivious behavior. The second speech goes equally like the first, and I'm reasonably convinced that Tilly can't be this stupid, whatever, that he's got to learn from his lessons. And he swears that he will do everything in his power to be a good sailor and good to his shipmates. And I kind of believe him. And I tell the chiefs and his department head, hey, this guy cannot obviously make a good decision. If you give him a hand grenade and put him in a closet, he will blow himself up. So obviously you need to work a little bit extra with him. There's a lot of value in him. He's a hard worker. We're just not going to throw him away. Okay? From that moment on, until the night we get notified we're deploying early to the Persian Gulf, Tilly is a model of hard work and everything that you can imagine. So when we get the notification that we're going to deploy 7 months early to the Persian Gulf, I gather the crew together on the flight deck, and I explain to them the situation. Since we've rarely been in port in this whole work period since we were commissioned, it should be a blow and a difficult thing for families. They all get it, they understand. I tell them that we're going to have Christmas leave. The first group will leave in the early part of December. You must be back by the 26th. The second group will leave shortly thereafter and come back 6 days before we deploy. Everybody get it? Yes, sir. To a man, yes, sir. Don't screw your shipmate. Don't come back late. Okay, here's a quiz. Of the 220 guys, who is the only one who doesn't come back on time? Tilly, right, you get an A. So obviously, it's his third mass case. I have got to take this, I hate mass, by the way, I despise it. I tell the crew, I hate it, don't come, because I'm gonna make you hate it too when you arrive. I have to take him to mass, and the master chief or the senior chief of the command tells me, it's time for Tilly to go. You know, he's the guy that's going to fall over the side, drop a projectile in the magazine, captain, you know. And I have the pen in my hand and his page 4, ready to detach him from the Navy. And I said to him, you know, we've tried everything. It doesn't seem to work. You just can't see him to get these things right. And Tilly says, Captain, can I speak? Sure, Tilly. What do you have to say? Sir, please don't throw me out of the Navy. It's all I got. I don't know my father. My mother is an alcoholic, didn't get much guidance there. And he said, and then my girlfriend broke up with me and stole my truck, and my dog bit me and ran away. I mean, you can't write this stuff. And so my XO, John Ecclebury, who's standing behind me, literally says, oh my God, he won't be able to do it. And he's right. I can't. So let me just tell you that in 29 3/4 years of the naval service, 200 and some odd days of combat, a couple of Purple Hearts, some distinguished awards, some great moments in the Navy. It is the smartest decision I ever made. because if I threw Michael Tilley out of the Navy that day, I probably wouldn't be here, and neither would be about 200 members of my crew, because we'd all be dead. So here's what happens on the 14th of April. Tilley, when I order everybody to come up above the main deck, we don't go to a standard general quarters configuration. We don't light off all 4 diesels because it's different, and we don't want to put an acoustic signature in the water. My call, my decision, call it what you will. Tilley decides that he doesn't want to come up out of the space because he's never seen us go to GQ before without the diesel, and just maybe the ship may need that diesel on the line, and this is payback time for him for the Navy. So Tilley tells the bridge that he's leaving AMR 1 and then closes the hatch and dogs himself in, fully aware that a mine detonation on the AMR 1 will totally destroy him. So when the explosion happens, Tilley is, I did miss one thing, and I have to go back because there's a punchline to the story. During the time we were in the Gulf, the chief engineer comes and tells me that he's given Tilley the AMR 1 as a space to run. At first, I'm incredulous. I said, seriously? And he said, yes, sir. He's been working really hard, and I wanted to give him some accountability and ownership, and I think that'll do the trick. Good idea. So at midnight one night, when I know Tilley just got off watch and he must be in the rack, I go all the way down to AMR 1. And when I descend into the space, there's Tilley scrubbing the deck. I say, Tilley, what the hell are you doing here? You're supposed to be in the rack. And he said, Captain, I'm just trying to keep the senior chief from wanting to kill me and throw me over the side. Okay. And I look around the space, it's immaculate. Everything is where it should be. The diesel is properly color-coded. The PMS is all done. The electrical safety log is in place. Everything is tagged out right. In fact, everything in the space is where it should be. And I'm impressed. So I have a short conversation with Tilley, and he said, you know, Captain, I know I got a big mouth, and I know I make mistakes, but I'm really trying to find a way to be successful. And I said to him, you know, Tilley, if you just learn everything in this space, if you just work hard, keep your mouth shut, stop ticking off the master chief or the senior chief, and do your job and be professional, you will be successful. And as I turned to leave the space and said, it's good to see you, you're doing a good job, he said, Captain, do you realize that you're the first person in my entire life that has ever told me I would be successful? And when you go back to your ship, you think about that. How many guys, how many men, how many women have gone through that in their lives and nobody has ever told them, you can be a success. But that was Tilley. So when you think he's out of the woods, he's really turned over a new leaf, 4 days later, there's a note in my suggestion box. And the senior chief brings it up to me, and he would like to kill Tilley. He thinks he's being disrespectful, and I think Tilley's just being Tilley. And that note says, Captain, I know you were down in my engineering space and you see how it is, and you know that because I'm standing port and starboard watches, I never get to see the light of day. Don't you think it would be possible to put a porthole in the main engineering space? Since it's under the waterline, Tilley, no, not a good idea. Okay, keep that one in mind. So, April 14th, 1988, Tilley has remained in the space. After the explosion and Walker has gotten control with the EPSI of our electrical load, he knows we have to get number 1 diesel started or we're just not going to make it. Suddenly on the 2JV, a voice says, hey, CCS, this is Tilley, I'm in AMR 1, what do you want me to do? Walker's response is really unprintable. It's very profound, and he tells Tilley to get the EOS card and line up the diesel to start. And Tilley informs him, I'm a fireman, I've never done that before, I've watched it, but I've never done it. Walker's response to that is also profound, and Tilley gets the EOS card and starts to line up number 1 diesel. When he steps outside the enclosure and looks at the starter mechanism to start the diesel, it's been fractured in the explosion. So he tells Walker, and Walker says, you're going to have to do a manual start. You have to climb up on top of the diesel and straddle it. You have to open the air flask behind you, and you have to hit the plunger that spins and starts the starter motor to the diesel. Tilley complies, gets up on top of the diesel, the plunger's fractured. He tells Walker, Walker says, get a screwdriver. You're going to have to do it manually. Till he climbs down off the diesel, goes and gets a screwdriver, climbs back up, and asks the chief one more time, are you really sure I'm doing this? Walker tells him yes, till he reaches behind himself, opens the valve on the 1,500 PSI air flask. Remember all the things broken in the space? That must have been a real daring act. The air goes between his legs into the starter motor. He reaches in with the screwdriver, opens the valve, and zzz, bam, number one diesel starts. He's ecstatic. He calls Walker and says, hey, I've started number one diesel. Yeah, it's profound. Get outside the space, get the EOS card for the electrical switchboard. You've got to bring the power from the diesel to the switchboard. Tilly again informs him, I'm not an electrician, I'm a fireman. I don't know any of this stuff. It doesn't matter. Tilly gets the card, the EOS card, and he stands in front of the I forget what they're called, not the cyclotrons on the switchboard. And as they're all turning in the clockwise direction at 11 o'clock, Tilly reaches up, about the same time I'm putting my hand on the ladder to come up out of the space, and throws the switch that brings the power from number one diesel to number one switchboard and onto the grid. In essence, Michael Tilly, the kid with 3 mass cases, the guy who a lot of people wanted to throw out of the Navy, saves Samuel B. Roberts. When people ask me, sure, you could have made it without that diesel, the answer is no. We lost number 3 diesel shortly thereafter. We would not have made it with just number 2 diesel. Tilly is emphatic in saving the ship. Now I'll just tell you that that gave us the power to continue to dewater. It gave us the power to continue to fight the fires until we put it out. And it gave us the power to energize our APUs and drive out of the minefield 23 miles on our own power, passing between 3 mines in that minefield that were around 100 yards apart and escape. Michael Tilly and the power of American sailors. Unbelievable what they can do as long as you inspire them and lead them. But the story of Tilly's not over in many respects. When we get into the dry dock, finally in Dubai, after getting towed 100 and some odd miles, and they put us on the blocks, I tell my XO I'm going to go out and sit on the side of the dry dock to assess how we look. Great sight. And I'm sitting on the dry dock looking at this 25-foot hole in the ship and a section of the keel that's gone, and it's all burned from frame 120 all the way back, and there's 2 cracks in the ship where you can see completely through it. And I'm honestly sitting there saying, Navy's newest frigate, Navy's youngest commanding officer. That's about $20 million of damage. I am so screwed. And with this, out of the corner of my eye, I see the senior chief of the command coming in my direction. And he's got a piece of paper in his hand, and he's upset. So he comes up to me and says, Master, Senior Chief, what is it? And Senior Chief Frost looks at me and he says, Captain, it's your favorite sailor, Tilly. It's in your suggestion box. And he hands me the note, and I have it to this day, and I opened it, and this is what it says. To Captain Wren from Fireman Tilly, Captain, with regard to my request for a porthole in the main engineering space, you have exceeded my wildest dreams. I just want you to know, before I finish this up, that every year I've been invited to speak at MIT, to speak to the maritime engineering curriculum who studies all the disasters at sea on ships, who measures what ships should stay afloat and what ships, the reason why they sink. The man who heads that department, Professor Corrigan, is a gnarly, nasty, mean guy, like Bill Erickson. And I wanted to go see him because he led the team that did the math and the ratings on Samuel B. Roberts. His conclusion was that the ship should have sunk in 1 hour and 10 minutes, or 58 minutes, or in that range. They modeled it 10 times. So I went to see Corrigan in his office in the bowels of MIT, and while I was sitting there talking to him, I kind of questioned why I came, because he said, you know, you just don't understand. It's all about physics. It's about buoyancy, it's about gravity, it's about volumetrics, and he went on, and I said, and he said, and that's quantitative. What you don't understand is that the performance of your crew the speed and the skill with what they did that night is non-quantitative. We can't measure that. But I will tell you, what they did outdid the physics of the moment and saved that ship, because there's absolutely no way you should have stayed afloat. The American sailor, remarkable, talented, brave, and professional. So today, we want to remember those sailors who have come before us and the ones who serve today. We mourn those who have lost along the way, but we honor them. We celebrate our shipmates' successes, and we applaud the new generation of sailors amongst us. You can all be proud of the profession that you've chosen. It is a calling to the sea that is steeped in history. Don't forget that. That our nation depends and trusts us. It is a powerful, noble calling to defend the nation and your countrymen and women. What could be more honorable? Not being the Jeopardy host. It is why a recent Pew survey and Gallup poll have found Americans trust you, you, well above any other or most other professions in our country. It is something you all should be proud of. I'm honored to be here in San Diego with all of you, and I'm proud to have led and served alongside of officers, chief petty officers, sailors, all like you, who are rugged, determined, have courage and great dedication to duty, and, as you've seen, a great sense of humor. You are a constant in our society and a great Navy, in our great Navy. It's the force that makes us strong and the talent that makes it work in the most critical of moments. Thank you for your sacrifice, your vigilance and dedication. May God bless all of you. May God bless our Navy, and God bless the United States of America. Thank you very much. Thanks. I don't know if you have any questions. Yes, Mr. McGrath. What is it? Brian, what's up? Well, at the expense of pointing a finger, I was asked by the CNO to go to Europe and brief the European navies on Stark and Roberts. I knew absolutely nothing about Stark because when we deployed, the Navy had not sent out any lessons learned on what happened in Stark. So we were kind of like, what the heck went on? I knew Glenn Brendel, the CO. He had been in the War College with me. He was a good guy. We had operated with the Stark in Guantanamo Bay and in the Caribbean. They were a good ship. What I found when I visited a number of the sailors and officers on that ship were initially that some of the public reports that came out were wrong. They weren't accurate. But the second thing was that Stark had fallen asleep at the switch, and they weren't paying attention. This is not to disparage them in any way, but the keys for the CUS, as you probably know, weren't in the space. There was no missile ready to go, and the antennas of the ship in that famous picture of her listing, they were all up. They couldn't fire the gun. The cutout cams would stop them from engaging. They were never thinking about fighting in the next 5 minutes to the next hour. That was the biggest lesson I took from that they had thought, like so many people have thought, and I have thought at times, oh, this is, we got this, it's all fine, we can respond. And I vowed that would never happen on Roberts. And as a leader, sometimes you give direction to people to go do things that you're really pissing them off, excuse my language. They don't want to do it again and again. They don't want to practice again and again, and they really just want to do it to show you they can do it without you driving them. Fine, I love it. That's what I want. But the most important thing is, you're not there to be their friend. You're there to be their leader, and you become their friend if you bring them all home to their wives and their parents and their friends and their spouses in one piece. Then you are their best friend, and it doesn't matter if they ever realize it. I'll share one story with you that it's just a side. Commodore Dyer came aboard the ship one time, and I made this terrible situation where you're doing a lot of operations, and I said, Commodore, I can't walk around with you today. We got too much going on. And he said, oh, that's okay, I'll walk around and talk to the crew. terrifying. You're like, Commodore's going to talk to the crew. Oh, man. So in the afternoon, about 1400 or 1600, I'm sorry, we're alongside the Mount Baker, we're unrepping, and we're in particularly close, flying helicopters and also passing ammo. And Dyer comes up and he says, well, I think I've talked to everybody in the crew. And I went, oh, God, this isn't good. And he said, do you want to know how they feel about you? And I said, no, I don't care. And he looked at me and he said, I don't believe that. I know you. You care. And I said, I don't care. This isn't a popularity contest. I just want them to be able to engage and do their job. And he said, well, I'm going to tell you what they think anyway. And I went, oh, good. And he said, the vast majority think you're a son of a bitch. But those same people say they want to be right next to you in the fight because they believe with you they cannot be beaten. And so they get it. They understand. And he said, and I think they actually like you. And I went, nah, can't be. So what did I take from the Stark? You can never let your guard down. And one of the points I was going to make is just before we made that turn to the south, west of the Rushdom oil fields, we knew Sabalan was to the north of us at 10 miles, 22,000 yards. And when I got the report from the guys in EW, instead of thinking, this guy never operates up here in the Gulf, why is he here? Which later on we realized he was there because he was going to come down and pick us up, out of the water and whatever. Instead, I thought, we've kicked this guy's ass 4 times. And if he comes down here, we'll give him more of the same. Wrong, 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 Captain. You should have been thinking tactically and strategically, what the heck is he doing here? And what is going on here? So it's easy to lose track of the fact that you're only good as your last battle. And Stark kind of reminded me of that and made me commit myself that that would never happen. And I think that's the greatest lesson that I got from the Stark. I hope that answers your question, Brian. Yeah. I have another question. Okay, I think we're done. So once again, thank you very much for coming. I hope you've gained something from this talk. And I've enjoyed being in your company. And have a great day, and good luck, and God bless you.